I think we're on. Hello everybody. Looks like there's actually people here. So nice to see you. My name is Rachel, and probably you know me as Aeolian Heart Astrology. And tonight I am doing my very first YouTube live stream. So hopefully there's no glitches or any interference. But hopefully everything's smoothly connected right now. Is anybody actually here? Can you hear me? So tonight I'm going to be talking about the US Pluto Return, because that's what's going on at the moment. And it's a big topic. There's a lot of articles on the US Pluto Return right now. And I think it's just something that's worth chit-chatting about for a little bit, because it's a big deal. And what happens in the United States affects the entire world. You know, my life coach is in Australia, and she's always talking about how she and her husband and her friends follow American politics closely for their own, out of necessity, essentially, because they're concerned about whatever is happening in America happening over there. And so that gave me a lot of perspective, truly, about, you know, the influence and effect of the United States on the rest of the world. And so I think it's important for everybody to tune in just a little bit to the US Pluto Return. Hi, Melissa. Oh, so nice to see you. Hi, Marilyn. Nice to see you. So I just want to start. We're just going to keep this casual. You know, this is a heavy, dark topic whenever you bring up Pluto. And I don't want to drag anybody down. So I really want to take the most positive perspective that we can, while acknowledging that Pluto is kind of a deep and dark topic. So what is the Pluto return? I will just start from the beginning. The concept of a planetary return, whether it's Mercury or Saturn or Pluto, is that the planet travels all the way through the zodiac and returns to a specific point in a natal chart. So on a personal level, I was born with my sun at 26 degrees Virgo. So my solar return on my birthday is when the sun returns to 26 degrees Virgo. And that happens every year. So that's easy to calculate. That's easy to follow. I have also a Venus return every year. I have a Mars return, and so do you, every 2 years. And I have a Jupiter return approximately every 12 years, because it takes the planet Jupiter 12 years to travel through the zodiac. When we stretch out one more planet beyond Jupiter, we're looking at Saturn. Saturn takes 28 to 30 years to travel through the entire zodiac. And so our Saturn return happens when we turn 28, 29, 30, depending on our specific placements. But when we get to the outer planets, otherwise known as the transpersonal planets, like Pluto, we're talking about gigantic cycles of time that go way beyond a human life. So Pluto takes approximately 247 to 250 years to go all the way through the zodiac. And so that is the cycle of time that we are talking about right now. So the Pluto return for the United States is a significant moment of development, a significant moment of catharsis for the nation of the United States. Countries have natal charts. And when we're talking about the US, we're actually talking about the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the moment that this country broke from Great Britain. And that's what we're really, really focusing on. Now, there are other really important dates in the US history. The signing of the Declaration of Independence is not the date that the country actually won the war. So the Revolutionary War was won many years later. It's not the birth date of the Constitution. It is specifically the birth date of the Declaration of Independence. So that's considered to be the chart that we're looking at when we talk about the Pluto return. Now, I want to talk about the fact that when the United States was formed, when the Declaration of Independence was signed, the founding fathers who created this country, they actually were all esotericists. They absolutely knew what the astrological conditions of July 4th, 1776 were. They were deists, they were Masons, they were philosophers, and they were definitely aware of what they were doing in terms of electing a date. The only thing that they were not aware of was where Pluto was, because Pluto didn't exist in 1776. Pluto was discovered in 1930. And therefore, wherever Pluto was in the United States' natal chart was completely and totally unconscious. And that's something that's really important to think about in terms of the development of consciousness itself, the consciousness of this nation, the consciousness of the world was affected by the discovery of Pluto. But let's go back to 1776. The natal chart of the United States was sort of created to represent a tremendous amount of high ideals, wealth, warmth, kindness. It was very much like it's the chart of a light worker, you know, like this idea of just being a really good person with really high ideals. But most of us that are familiar with pop psychology at this point are really aware that when you are polarized too much in the light, when you think of yourself as a good person without any flaws, when you never explore what's underneath all of that, there's a tremendous shadow. There's a tremendous schism between the conscious self, the egoic ideal, and what we call the shadow in pop psychology, or what we just call the rejected part of ourselves. And so the United States has this natal chart that was chosen to represent a lot of really good things. And in this particular moment in history, it is the common dialogue, it is the dialogue of the world to criticize how far short of the ideals this country has actually fallen. And there are so many angles that can be taken on that. But the real criticism is such high ideals and yet so much hypocrisy, such high ideals, and it has just failed to deliver. The ideas that were laid down in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution have never been fully realized. And one of the reasons why, astrologically speaking, is because of this presence of Pluto in Capricorn, which is on the opposite side of the zodiac from the United States' Sun and the United States' Mercury in Cancer. So we have Pluto opposing the Sun and Cancer, the Sun and Mercury in Cancer, and creating this unconscious desire or this unconscious drive for power. And just from like a sort of human development perspective, if we looked at this country as a person, it was separated from an evil empire, which was Great Britain, and yet contained a lot of, or retained a lot of those values. No matter how severe the separation was, no matter how rebellious and liberating the separation from Great Britain was, still the poison of imperialism was in the wound, if you will. The poison was in the wound, and that poison in the wound can be seen in the placement of Pluto in Capricorn in the US chart. So of course, like in 1776, none of the people that had anything to do with building this country or fighting the war had any idea about Pluto. They didn't see that coming exactly. They were probably more short-sighted, and perhaps being very idealistic people had a really optimistic view of what was possible. But over the course of the last 250 years, for all of the wonderful things that the United States has done, It has evolved into a plutocracy, and it has evolved into an evil empire. It's an evil empire and a plutocracy. And yes, the word Pluto is present in that word, plutocracy. Pluto is, in Roman mythology, the god of the underworld. And in Roman mythology, the god of the underworld was associated with tremendous wealth. The idea being that there is tremendous wealth buried beneath the surface of the Earth's buried beneath the Earth. There's tremendous wealth in terms of minerals and ore, and now, of course, the discovery of oil and things like that. So Pluto rules all of the wealth that is buried underneath the surface of the Earth. But Pluto also represents the unconscious realm. So the past, the things that we wish to repress, the things that we keep obscured, the lust for power that we don't like to present in polite society, the lust for influence and wealth that may be something that would get you ostracized if it were on the surface, and therefore it becomes a shadow aspect. So the United States had, from the beginning, this shadow of imperialism. And of course that's played out, and everybody knows it. And that's one of the beautiful things about this time, the Pluto return, is that all of the things that have been hidden, all of the darkness that was underneath the surface, all of the things that the sort of character of this country never admitted before is all on the table. And it is a very difficult time. It's a very difficult time to live through. But the Pluto return being a significant climax in a long transit of Pluto through Capricorn does represent an opportunity, like a seed moment for some tremendous transformation. And that is really what Pluto is about, is transformation, regeneration. It is a planet of alchemical transmutation. So even though all of this darkness is coming up, what is actually happening is this great purgation. Things are being revealed and released. This poison that was in the wound is now coming to the surface. It's now being drawn out for the purpose of being dissolved, being washed away, being integrated. So what this represents in a really long scale of time is the opportunity for the United States to actually integrate its shadow, which means having a much healthier, much more balanced, much more wholesome character, much more wholesome soul after this period is over. And I am not trying to indicate that there's utopia coming, because I think that's really silly and also dangerous to predict things like that. But nevertheless, what the Pluto return is about is the full process of death and rebirth. The journey through the underworld, the dark night of the soul, is a part of a process of transformation. And that is what Pluto is all about. So what is being transformed? Pluto is associated with governments, authority, power, the plutocrats, the elite, the political elite. That is who resonates with the planet Pluto. And so that is actually the sector of humanity that is most vulnerable to the death and transformation. The transformative wave that Pluto has summoned is actually going after the institutions of power and the political elite that occupy those institutions of power, meaning that their world is coming to an end. And of course, the conversation right now is often made to sound like the whole world is coming to an end. But that's not actually the case. The whole world is not coming to an end. The world that was built in the image of the hierarchical power of empires from past centuries is coming to an end. As it did 250 years ago when the Declaration of Independence was signed. Whatever your opinions on that moment in history may be, that was a tremendous shift in the structure of power. That was a tremendous blow to Great Britain and its empire. The monarchy of Great Britain was humbled by that moment. And so that is actually what's happening right now, despite the fact that common people are suffering a lot. Common people are not being heard. Common people are definitely feeling the pressure of this time. But it really, truly is the swing of the pendulum pulling the focus of power and the accumulation of resources and the accumulation of influence away from that tiny 1%, as people say now, that tiny 1%. The pendulum is swinging back to bring more equality, more freedom, more influence to common people, everyday people, everyone else, 99% of the world population. And again, I don't mean this to sound overly simplistic, but there is like a very broad view, very large scope of time that Pluto deals with. And the pendulum is swinging finally away from the continuous centralization of power. So I guess what really climaxed with this transit of Pluto in Capricorn was the continuous, unstoppable centralization of power. And we all know that that's been going on. The the amount of conglomerations of power that we are subject to, all of us, not just in the United States. And that's why the US Pluto Return is not just about people that live in America. It's about the whole world, because America's become the pinnacle of this global tyranny, if you will, this global imperialism. But we have things like, the United Nations, a conglomeration of power, something like NATO, conglomeration of power, the World Economic Forum, which is like the high priesthood of the plutocrats. The World Economic Forum, they're not elected, they're not representatives of any people. These are the wealthy elite that seek to rule the world without any due process, without any legislative checks and balances, without any agreement from anyone else in the world. So the plutocrats are behind all of that. The World Economic Forum, a conglomeration of power. The Federal Reserve, certainly in the United States, which affects the whole world because the US dollar is the global currency, and that is controlled by the Federal Reserve. We see the plutocratic spirit in the surveillance state. Everything that we do is tracked and brought back to a centralized database. And we've known that for a long time, but it was officially recognized during this transit of Pluto through Capricorn when Edward Snowden came out and he spoke up about what he knew, what was going on, that everybody, average citizens, were being spied on by their own government, surveillance state. This is all just symptoms of the centralization of power, unchecked centralization. And the other example that we are all a part of, we've all experienced, is just the amount of the reduction in how many media companies actually control every single message that we receive. I think it was like 40 years ago, it was like 50 companies controlled media, which is not that much. Even still, only 50 companies controlling all the media 40 years ago. You cut to like 2011, there were 6 corporations that controlled every single movie studio, television station, news station, newspaper, all of it. And of course, internet providers as well, included in that. And I believe my husband Andre is here. Andre, how many now? It's not 6, it's like 3.
Yeah, it's like 3. It's Viacom,
AT&T, and
it's on the tip of my tongue.
There's like 3 media companies now. three corporations that control everything. They just, big fish ate the little ones, and now there's like 3 fish. So my point is, once again, this was the transit, Pluto in Capricorn. Capricorn being the sign that control, or that I should say is associated with worldly power, institutions of power, building hierarchies, governments, of course. Pluto in Capricorn, which began in 2008, has been this great narrative of the final, like the climax or the exclamation mark on the centralization of power. And we see it at every single level of society. And it's been intense. It can't really get much more extreme than it is right now. You know, we're all being tracked all the time. There's only 3 companies, and really they're all working together. So there's only 3 companies that own every single message that you receive. And that's why this centralized power is fighting so hard to continue to keep a grip on the entire globe, to sort of not just monopolize, but monotonize human life, not just civilization, not just culture, just life in general. There is this quality of monoculture, monotheism, monotone, monotony, when everything is controlled by one central force. And that is the dark side of Pluto, you know, this dark side of Pluto in Capricorn, certainly. Now, this took centuries to actually build up. It took centuries, and it has required the development of the kind of technology that we have. And it's required everything that is in existence right now for that to be accomplished. And now that we've reached this crisis point and this seed moment, the US Pluto return, we are going to start seeing a trend of the pendulum swinging the other way. Like, power cannot be amassed anymore, really. And I know that people in power are addicted to power, and they want more always, no matter what. There's always more that they want. More money, more power. However, it is not within the capacity of nature to allow stasis and stagnation, nor is it in the true nature of Pluto to allow for stasis and stagnation. Because though Pluto is associated with all of these dark forces, all of this power, all of these politics, all of this power, what Pluto really is a force of nature. And if you are willing to, if you look up the glyph for Pluto, meaning the symbol, the astrological symbol, you will see that it's a cross. It's like the cross of matter. The cross in astrological glyphs always means the 4 elements. So this world of matter. And on top of the cross of matter, there's this great, cup. It looks like a cup. Or you could say it looks like a satellite dish or a cup, or a crescent of receptivity, which is what it is. A crescent of receptivity. And then above the crescent is a circle. And that circle is hovering. It's not connected to the crescent. It's not fully connected. It's hovering inside the cup. And what that glyph reveals is the spirit of an age, which is what the circle is. Circle of spirit. The spirit of an age being born, meaning that it's descending into matter. But it hasn't quite connected yet. So Pluto represents these liminal places between eras or aeons or epochs. So death and rebirth, that's what Pluto represents. Those liminal places in between epochs. So we're in a time right now where, yes, like the pendulum has swung as far as it can swing towards that centralization of power, central banks, central finance, central media, monotony, monotheism, monoculture. And now the pendulum is going to swing back the other way. The spirit of a new age is going to be born. And the spirit of that new age, with the pendulum swinging the other way, is naturally going to start moving towards what? Decentralization. That mass culture, that one ideology, that one way of doing things, that centralized power is going to start naturally breaking up and dispersing. And this will happen as an evolutionary force, whether the people in power right now like it or not. King George did not want to let the colonies go. It wasn't in his playbook, it wasn't in his vision, but it's what happened because a new era was dawning and Pluto was moving into Aquarius back then as well. The Revolutionary War was actually won when Pluto was in Aquarius. The Constitution of the United States was written when Pluto was in Aquarius. Pluto's going to be in Aquarius for the first time next spring, March of 2023. Just for a moment, we're going to get a little taste. Then Pluto's going to retrograde back into Capricorn, and we're going to finish this cycle. And finally, in 2024, Pluto's going to move into Aquarius again. We will be completely and totally done with Pluto and Capricorn by 2025. But 2024 is the first really significant Pluto in Aquarius year. So we're almost through this transit. And this transit began in 2008. And we all need to reflect on that. Because that was the moment that Obama became president. The housing crisis blew the economy up. And we just settled into, as a nation, we just settled into endless war, which isn't even war, just endless imperial occupation. And not that that wasn't a problem before. It most definitely was. But it was almost like it became settled into this shadow. There was a lot of protest about the war in Iraq. And then suddenly, silence, and a lot of resistance was still present to the way things were going. There was a lot of resistance, but there was such a shadow, such a dark shadow on our country. And in that shadow, people have become so increasingly polarized. Obviously, the economic divide has continued to become more and more severe. The conditions have become very stark, very hard, very edgy, very, very, very challenging. But what the point of this moment in history is to know that no matter how bad it looks right now, the power of the individual is going to come back into the forefront. The meaning of sovereignty as an individual and the influence that each individual has, the power of each individual voice, these things are going to start mattering again. And that's because the homogenized, monopolized power is going to break up and disperse and become more organically distributed. And I'm actually not talking about communism. I'm not talking about another dated 20th century economic solution that doesn't actually work. I'm talking about something organic that happens through networks, through the sharing of information, through the egalitarian communities that people actually build themselves from the ground up, grassroots stuff that's actually real. Not things that people at the top impose upon the collective. Rather, I'm talking about the natural dispersion of power, knowledge, wealth, sovereignty. So the whole idea of like the 1%, the expert class, having so many authorities above the average person that the average person relies upon for everything, that's going to start dissolving more and more and more. And power, authority, and the wealth of knowledge and resources is going to naturally become more evenly distributed. And it's not necessarily going to be the easiest transition. We're definitely in revolutionary times. But these are the times that we were born to experience. These are the times that we were born to understand. And there are a lot of sociological theories that see mass culture, which is what we knew in the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century, mass culture, which is defined, or mass society, which is defined as like this monolithic force that is fueled by the centralization of power and thought. That is evolving into something called network society. So this isn't even astrology. This is just sociology. Mass society has no autonomy from institutions. You need universities to accredit you. You need people to validate you. You need stamps of approval. You need validation. You need to climb the ladders. You need the hierarchies that are present in order to be given the keys to the kingdom. You have to have authority granted to you by higher authority to do anything. And it also works again with the idea of media and the messages that we receive. You have to rely on authorities to shape your worldview, versus network society, which is what we are evolving into. We are in it now, but it is most definitely, it has a lot more evolution to go. And it's definitely something that Pluto in Aquarius is really going to evolve and explore. But network society, that's an idea that was coined in the early 90s. Of course, the early 90s, when the internet became available for the first time for everybody, the democratic internet. This is social, political, economic changes that are caused in society through the spread of networked communications, meaning that people are getting together and they're sharing knowledge in a way that is outside of monolithic authority, that's outside of the plutocratic system. People are creating their own organic communities, vibes, tribes, all kinds of things. It's not always good. It can be bad, but it's ecological. It's just how naturally things evolve when people have other ways of knowing, other ways of accessing information, other ways of learning, gaining power. Knowledge is power, and knowledge is widely available. So we don't need universities anymore. The invention of cryptocurrency is a really hot topic when we talk about decentralization. And the reason why is because it was invented out of thin air by a very imaginative and extremely courageous person. And the idea behind that was to create a network society that has its own currency that could possibly be more valuable than the plutocratic system of currency. This offers a lot of people a tremendous sense of freedom, relief, liberation from the mass culture. So that is what's happening. And Pluto in Aquarius is going to be, by nature, certainly tormented by tyrants, no doubt. They're not all going to go away in a couple of years. There's still going to be this grasping from the monolithic plutocrats to retain their world domination. They're going to want to hold that. But Pluto in Aquarius is going to naturally open up more of a humanitarian dialogue, more of a humanitarian inventive spirit. There's going to be more natural egalitarian. One thing that I was reading about is like in the 80s, back to the US, Ronald Reagan, Reaganomics was all about freedom, meaning economic freedom. But they had completely stopped talking about equality. Whereas in 1776, whether the country lived up to it or not, the actual documents that the founding fathers wrote, they equate freedom and equality as being both absolutely necessary. The left hand and the right hand, freedom and equality. And I feel like in Pluto and Aquarius, that is going to come back to the forefront. It's not just freedom, it's freedom and equality, something that actually sort of balances. One balances the other, one feeds the other, one flows into the other, and there's a tremendous flowering of potential when both of those subjects are of concern. So we are going to see a lot of things continue to collapse, all of this disintegration, the crumbling of the things that we once believed in, the things that we once rested upon, things like universities, our government. The United States government is an absolute shipwreck right now. It's a shipwreck, and all you can do is laugh that in this moment of death and disintegration, that the people in power resemble zombies. It's like, it's really scary, but it's also really scary. It's actually legitimately scary, as zombies are. They're actually really scary because they're dead and they're parasitic. But this is the time, the US Pluto return, when that industrial era myth of progress has collapsed. The myth of progress was essentially this idea that the more technology we have, the better we will be. The more fulfilled, more happy, more rich, more joyful, more inventive, more intelligent we will be. It's not that simple. It's just not that simple. There's going to be, when the pendulum swings, our technology is wonderful. It's not going to go away. But when the pendulum swings, the way that we use it, the value that we put on it, the lifestyle that we live in relationship to technology is going to have to change. And that does not necessarily mean that we're going to dive deeper into it. I actually don't think so. I don't think people want to dive deeper. Not that many people want to live in virtual reality instead of having a sensual, fulfilling, pleasurable experience in life. Most people want a nice balance. And so the myth of progress has collapsed. We cannot escape the laws of nature. We can't escape death. The hubris of the industrial era is finally concluded. And it's really poetic and very beautiful that the US Pluto return comes at this time when we can just lay that to rest. And there will always be people that haven't gotten the memo, that haven't felt the vibe shift, but anyone that's interested in astrology has picked up on the shift. Anyone who's interested in astrology understands that we need ecological philosophy, which is what astrology is, because it's hermetic. Hermetic philosophy, things like astrology, magic, and alchemy, understand the interdependence of life, of consciousness itself. The ecological philosophy that is acknowledging the web of life and the interdependence of all life forms on the planet is not new. It's something that the dogmatic materialists are just getting glimmers of, just starting to wake up to. It's a revelation for them. But that's because dogmatic materialism breeds a moronic, overly educated mindset that can't see anything except the most narrow bandwidth. But that's not really the way that society is going. Certainly not in the United States. There is a tremendous spiritual, transcendental revolution. This country has always been outside of the politics. We can remove that conversation just for a minute. One of the beautiful things about the United States is that it has always been one of the most spiritually alive and radiant cultures on the planet. There are so many people in this country that are just lit up by mystical exploration, revelation, a relationship with God, a relationship with the divine. Transcendentalism is American, and it's still alive. So the transcendentalist current has evolved, and it's still alive, and it's most definitely a big part of what's happening for the good in this Pluto return time. And I will finally mention that Pluto returns they're these great tests that we have to go through as a country. And it's really hard because we as individuals get caught up in this huge current that we have no control over. We cannot stop it. We can't stop the flow. We can't stop the current. It's something much bigger than any individual can possibly influence. We just have to yield to the current at some level. But it's really important for each individual because each individual's inner world does matter. Your vision for what is happening and the images that you're holding and the feelings that you really feed, what you're really nourishing your soul with, does matter at a time like this. Pluto returns can be tremendous periods of renaissance because, like I said, it's alchemical. So rather than just destroying everything and starting from scratch, it's not like that at all. It's more like turning lead into gold. So we can appreciate a lot of the darkness and the poison and the toxicity and the hatred that has bubbled up, because all of that is raw material to an alchemist. The alchemical position is that waste, base matter, lead, all of these toxic, poisonous, dark materials are in fact what we use to create the gold, the spiritual gold. And that's definitely when a culture experiences collective transmutation, lead into gold, that's what we call a renaissance. And certainly England had their second Pluto return in like the mid 16th century. So 1555, I believe it began. That was the Elizabethan era. That was a difficult time. It was a time of religious conflict, Protestants and Catholics. Sure, there's political turmoil, just like there is right now. There was a lot of polarity that was pulling and pushing that creates the dynamic flux of a tremendous transformation. So there was that conflict, and there was plague as well. There was a lot of challenges in terms of sickness and plague. But this was also considered to be a golden age because this was the time of John Dee, the great magician. This was the time of Shakespeare, Sir Francis Drake. We're still going on about the flowering of consciousness that occurred in the Elizabethan era in England, and that was a Pluto return. So yeah, it's a difficult time, but what it can produce in terms of evolution, what it can produce in terms of a flowering of imagination is profound. And I don't see any reason why the United States and all of the world countries that are affected by what happens in the United States couldn't experience a tremendous flowering of imagination, a tremendous transmutation. And I do see it. I mean, I feel strongly like many people are seeing past the political duality that we're supposed to believe in. A lot of people are seeing above and through the media manipulation. They're seeing above and through the forced polarization, and rather they are instead creating unity. They are envisioning far beyond what is currently happening. They are envisioning a functional economy, functional currencies, energies that could free us from all of the problems that the industrial era has produced in terms of pollution. There are so many things like right here. And it's almost artificially being restrained by, of course, people in power who do not want this evolution to occur. But it's going to, whether they like it or not. Just like the colonies in America were liberated from England, whether King George, who was a demented old fool, whether he liked it or not. So That's what's going on right now with the US Pluto Return. It's a really hard time. I live here. I live in Los Angeles. It's not an easy time, but it is an exciting time. And we should hope and pray that we are actually a part of a great renaissance, you know. Oh my gosh, you guys. Okay. There's all these chats. Okay. Harold, are you suggesting that at least in part the declaration was signed on its birthday to have the US be born in the sign of Cancer? Harold, that is exactly what I'm saying. The founding fathers actually, they specifically chose that date not just because of the sun in Cancer, but because the fixed star Sirius shows up in that constellation, and it was essential for the sun to be overlaid on top of Sirius. And that's another conversation for another time. But the star Sirius has more star lore than any other fixed star. You can read about the star Sirius for the rest of your life and not get to the bottom of the well. But it was a key point in Egyptian mysteries, and it has only continued from that time to now. So yes, the founding fathers were specifically working with the star Sirius. And that is why they signed the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. The sun and Sirius were conjoined. So good question. Tanya, hi. I believe the founding fathers delivered. Yes, she does. Yes. Okay, Brett. Obama put everyone to sleep with the anti-war imperialism. Yeah, I mean, that era did. Obama was the figurehead, you know? And he certainly, I mean, I'm pretty sure I think he was like a master of NLP and things like that in his speeches and stuff. So certainly, but it was like a bigger current of unconsciousness that was honestly meant to happen at a certain level. I mean, with astrology, the planets influence the mass mind more than the individual mind. Each one of us has our own personal relationship to these currents and these weather patterns. But it is very much, we have more choice and more free will in terms of our personal, I guess the higher your vibe, the less the planetary energies or influences can bring you down. Just like with meteorological weather, you know, if you're feeling good, there's no rainy day that's going to bring you down. If you're feeling healthy and good, there's no rainy day that's going to make you sick or sad, you know, because your vibe is high. And it's very similar with the planets. But the mass mind, which is what, you know, certainly a country represents, and we're all influenced by the mass mind at some level. So none of us gets to be total individuals. Nobody gets to be. We all are tuned in and tapped into the mass mind, right? But the unconsciousness that just seemed to flood the US during the Obama administration at some level was meant to be, because it was an important element of what's happening now. Almost like every person had to be drawn into that darkness. Every person had to be sucked into the unconsciousness. Because at some level, I'm not taking personal responsibility for those wars. I am not personally responsible, and I never supported anyone who ever supported any of those military actions, ever. But it was still done with our tax dollars. It was still done in our name. There's still some stain. There's still some karma that's on each person in this country. And so that unconsciousness was almost like a part of the initiation into really transforming. And of course, the real trouble with that was that it divided people. It really divided people. There's people that can handle the truth, that it's wrong to do those things. It's wrong to invade another country and maim, murder, and destroy. It's just wrong. Some people can handle that truth and some people can't. The people that can't, they become completely unconscious. The people that can may also become unconscious because they're in so much pain. You know, it was a very difficult time. But yeah, that era, that was the beginning of the United States' Pluto return. And yeah, there's a lot of imperialism before, and it was just becoming so heavy. I saw Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood the other night, and I had never seen the film before, but it came out in 2008. And for those of you who haven't seen it, it's actually a really great film. But what really struck me is it's about Clint Eastwood plays this old Korean War veteran, and he's super bitter and he's racist and he's all these things. He's just like this really troubled old man, and he is now living in his 1950s neighborhood, which is full of immigrants, specifically Hmong immigrants from Vietnam. And at first, he really resents them and looks at them with scorn. And eventually, it's a really heartwarming story. Eventually, he becomes dear friends with them. Like, it's a deep, deep friendship. It's such a deeply loving movie at its core. But what he has in common with the people next door is that these are refugees from the Vietnam War. They were forced to leave their own country because of the Vietnam War, because they fought on the side of the Americans. And so after the war, they became massacred by their own countrymen because they were on the wrong side of the war. So the Vietnamese who were in the Viet Cong side, they started murdering the Hmong people. So they became refugees. They found a place in this country as best they could. But it's really hard for them. It's a difficult place to be. It's a difficult integration. They're really struggling. A lot of them are turning to crime. They're going to prison. It's a really sad story in so many ways. And then this man, the Korean War veteran, he's all PTSD'd and fucked up from the war. And so he's not been well emotionally or spiritually, psycho-spiritually ever since. So I was like, wow, both of these characters, the family next door and the old man, are the victims of this American imperialism, post-colonialism, as they call it in grad school, but just imperialism, just unnecessary war. And it was so hard and heavy, but it was a beautiful film, very cathartic in terms of bringing up the Pluto and Capricorn issues that really needed to be confronted. And like I said, I had never seen it. I didn't see it back in 2008. I saw it like 2 nights ago, and I was like, what year did this come out? It's a Pluto and Capricorn film to the max, So I highly recommend Gran Torino. It's actually a really well-written film. I highly recommend it. And it is a good meditation on these themes, just the unconsciousness about how wrong this has been, this legacy of imperialism, which has always been divided from the people. So in a country that is supposed to be, once again, it's like the light worker who thinks it's just such a good person. We're a representative democracy. We're a constitutional republic for the people, by the people. And we haven't fought a single war that represented any need for our domestic defense in ages. I mean, the last war that I guess had to be fought, and I would still argue against that, but the Civil War, there was actually people on other people's doorstep that needed to be defended away. But we're talking about these ridiculous international global imperialist wars that none of the people in this country ever wanted to fight, but they did so out of that, that sense of duty and that sense of obligation, that patriotism, and that all has crumbled. The whole thing has just fallen apart, and it is a very painful time, especially when you have grandparents and stuff that are still alive, and you see just how deeply troubled and deeply betrayed the old people amongst us feel. It's a really hard time, but I do have a lot of optimism, and I hope that all of you do too. Tanya said, I remember as a single mama of 3 in 2008, I was struggling so much to pay bills, and then there was a bailout. Then I learned AIG executives and banks were bailed out. My intuition bristled, and to be good and do right, Belle inside started to question. Thankfully, I'm ready to not rely on any of this anymore. Create new education, food sharing, money, whatever it takes. Right on, Tanya. And I'm really sorry that you had to go through that. I am really sorry to hear that. That was such bullshit. That was a terrible time. A truly treacherous and terrible time. Like, talk about a dark night of the soul on a personal level. But like the transformation of your attitude, where you're coming from, what you know is right and what needs to be done, is what I really see as possible for the entire country, you know? At least enough people to actually make it happen. I really do believe that this is possible. And this is not pie in the sky, Burning Man utopia stuff. I mean, like, for real, like, we could live in a much more functional society, and we could stop letting the government take our money to go to attack countries that have never done us wrong. You know, I went to the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show a few years ago, and I met all these people from all over the world, including like the most beautiful man from Afghanistan. And I was just like, we're all getting along. It's so wonderful. I can't believe that that the powers that be, the plutocrats, are keeping us from just getting the fuck along. It's really not that hard. None of us have any beef with each other. None of us have a problem. You know, it's not even like how in Gran Torino, this poor old man that fought in the Korean War is still racist against Asians. He's still afraid of them, which is what the message is. He's afraid of them still because of what he experienced in the war, because he was traumatized by the fact that he had to kill so many of these young kids, basically. It comes out that he killed like 13 teenage boys, basically. So he hides behind his prejudice. He hides behind his hate. And it's so sad. Because he's afraid of them. But I'm like, we're not even living in that world anymore. Like, people that this country has been at war with, people of this country, we don't hate those people. Like, that's not even happening. There's absolutely no reason for this. You know, that division is not even there. Like, we can just get along. Ro. Hi, Ro. I would love more egalitarian systems. It's felt to me like people have a less empathic view towards others than ever on an individual level lately. Well, that depends. That really depends. I know what you mean. The pandemic has not been good for individual empathy. You know, separating everybody and dehumanizing them, can't see anybody's face and separating everybody, and also making everyone feel like other people are germs. You know, that's more effective than racism, because now everybody, there's not even a type of person, it's just every person you're afraid of. Like, that does not have a good effect. That is not good. So I understand what you mean. But there are beautiful pockets, there are wells of deep compassion, connection, and love still. And I encourage you to believe in that, and you will find it. I struggle going out and stuff too. It's hard. You know, I'm in Los Angeles. It's still really dark here. You know, they're not lightening things up at all. But the idea of the Pluto return is that it brings all this darkness out. It sort of boils it away. It's being purged, and it's giving us material to transmute. So we must not give into despair. And one thing that keeps me going is I remember that a despairing idea of where humanity's at as a whole is exactly the way that the surveillance state, the war criminals, that's the attitude that they have about humanity. That's their position. They have a very dark, despotic view of what humanity is, a dehumanized view. And so I try to remember that, you know, like that attitude is something that's being fed to us all the time. And I'm not saying that we haven't had personal experiences where people are being really unempathic or really selfish or really unfair. I know that it's out there. But when you tune into like the collective, when you really think of humanity as a whole, don't give in to that feeling, because that is what they want. That's what warmongers want. So I won't give into it. I believe that humanity as a whole has lots of love and plenty of empathy. I know that a lot of people have been really frightened out of their wits. And so I'm just waiting for people's fright to relax and release. And I mean, I've been working for an acupuncturist for the last 2 years. And so I've been studying Chinese medicine. I could never be a doctor because I'm afraid of blood, but I do get to study the system of the body through the meridians and the different organ systems. And fright and fear is something that stresses the kidneys, number one. It stresses the kidneys really bad. And fright actually, it legitimately cuts you off from a lot of nutrients, and it cuts you off from being able to think. You can't think at all. Like, it's not even a joke. You think you're thinking when you're afraid, but there's none. So just wait for people to calm down, and they'll be restored, or a lot of people will. Okay, Tanya, I live in Philly and attend the reading of the Declaration of Independence yearly. Ooh, at Independence Hall. Fascinating now more than ever in hindsight of recent events. Wow, that's really cool. I didn't even know they did that. I had no idea that they read it aloud in Philadelphia, but that's so cool. I would love to see that. I would absolutely love to see that. Actually, really, I've never been to Pennsylvania, and I really want to go. I want to see Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. I think that's amazing. So, wow, Tanya, I think that you should definitely go this year. Because this is like, the anniversary in terms of what was going on. Because they made a declaration of, it was a declaration of war. But it was in the name of like this, the pendulum is going to swing. The pendulum is going to move in another direction, and they took advantage of it. They took advantage of that momentum, and each one of us can too. And it's a different era. We don't have to declare war, specifically, but we can at a certain level by saying, I refuse to allow my sovereignty to be taken by force, and I refuse to let my heart and soul be jaded and numbed and destroyed by this monstrous message out there. I refuse to be dehumanized and dehumanize others. So, and I refuse to think of other people like germs. Even though I'm a Virgo and I've always been a germaphobe, like, don't get me wrong. Like, I was a super prude in high school because the thought of like tongue kissing random people was disgusting to me. But nevertheless, like, you can't look at everybody like they're germs. It's just not healthy. It's not psychologically feasible to live that way. Okay, Tanya. At some level was meant to be because of what's happening now. Thank you. Yeah, we are. Pluto is all about alchemy. I call it the Aeonic death god. And it's also these, Edgar Allan Poe said the Plutonian shore. The Plutonian shore, that was in The Raven. The Plutonian shore, meaning that ebb and flow of life and death, that ebb and flow between eras, that ebb and flow. Pluto brings the richness of the past back up onto the shore as fresh materials for us to work with, so we can expect in the United States, like, all of the true wealth, which was the ideals, the knowledge, the philosophy that really mattered. It can be brought back up onto the shore for us to work with now. And perhaps actually realize more of the vision than ever was realized before. The idea that this country has seen its best days and they're long behind us is ridiculous, because it never actually fully flowered. Those ideals never fully flowered. People have tried their hardest. People have they've made tremendous attempts, but there's been a lot of challenge. There's been a lot of terrible things to drag down the realization of an actual democracy, an actual representative democracy, constitutional republic. We have not seen that fully functional yet. So why not in the next 200 years? Knowing what we know now, having gone through what we've gone through, being these generations that have come after so much so many mistakes, so many triumphs. You know, we have all of that in us. Why not? Why not now? All right. War is lucrative. Yeah, Tanya, war is lucrative. Divide and conquer is how they always operate. Any tyrant or war criminal divides and conquers. And the best thing you could do is to divide the individual. Get the individual to hate themselves. Get the individual to have cognitive dissonance. You know, cognitive dissonance, which really was the name of the game in the Obama era. That was cognitive dissonance. Like, I remember I just saw like every anti-war protest movement just was gone. And at the time, everyone that was liberal back then was against war. And then suddenly they weren't. Same people, no more anti-war protests, no more struggle against, you know, selling out, selling out. All these things that had been like major tropes in my youth were just gone. It was so strange. Cognitive dissonance, which is when you say one thing and you mean another, you're divided against yourself. Your mind is cut into two pieces, and that is the best way to conquer everyone. And then, of course, if you have cognitive dissonance, it's easy for you to attack your fellow human beings because you're going to project your unintegrated shadow onto somebody else for whatever reason. It could be the color of their skin. It could be their economic situation. It could be their political opinion. It could be the way they eat. It could be the way they dress. It doesn't really matter. There's plenty of ways to divide people, but cognitive dissonance, divided against yourself is the worst. And I really feel like that's what we're up against with mass media propaganda. It's designed to divide us against ourselves. You know, just from the consumerist level, we are all made to feel constantly like we are lacking and we are without, that we need all kinds of things to fulfill us, that we have a hole that can only be filled by insert the product or service. And that's how advertising works. And so just on that level alone, there's so much cognitive dissonance. There's so many divisions, so many contradictions within ourselves. And it takes a tremendous amount of strength and courage to overcome that, to evolve past that. But that is what evolution is. Pressure is put on, insecurity is created by certain conditions, and mutation that goes in a positive direction. Evolution is the response. That is nature. And so despite the fact that there's so many things working against us, there's so many things working for us. There's an equal amount working for us. And that is nature itself, which we are a part of. Each one of us is equally representative of the forces of nature. Each one of us is a seed of divine consciousness. Each one of us has something to add to this, and each one of us can evolve to improve the conditions that we're under. And I really do believe that. The Aquarian age, it's kind of it's a murky topic because a lot of people disagree about when it actually begins. But the Aquarian age is a time when we could say that we're definitely in an Aquarian era at the moment. And that's because Jupiter and Saturn conjoined on the solstice of 2020 in Aquarius. And Pluto is moving into Aquarius in just a couple of years. Like I said, that's the beginning of the pendulum swinging back towards the needs of the common person, back towards a genuinely humanitarian bent, not major corporations pretending they're humanitarian. Aquarian age reality is that each individual understands the relationship between their internal world and the external world, which is basically just Hermetic philosophy becomes common knowledge. You know, Hermetic philosophy becomes common knowledge. So we don't allow other people to implant toxic images within us and allow them to take root and allow them to control us from within. Rather, we learn how to cultivate our inner world as though it is our home. It's our inner temple. You know, the way that we cultivate the environment of our home to reflect what we need and what makes us comfortable and what makes us flourish. The inner world is the same, our inner temple, our imagination. So what I really see, like the real revolution begins there, where on a mass level, individual people understand the necessity of taking care of their inner world, cultivating their inner world, evolving to care for the images that they hold and the language that they use as second nature, you know, truly second nature. And I don't think it's the first time humanity has done this. I think that humanity has had many different eras where that was stronger, and therefore people understood their power, their creative power, which comes from the cultivation of imagination and the inner world. So Hermetic principles becoming common knowledge is what I see for America, most definitely. And that is not a religion. That is a philosophy, and you can practice any religion on top of that. Absolutely. Hermetic realities, Hermetic principles are in all religions anyway. I mean, any true religion, any religion that's not trying to prevent you from realizing your spiritual essence. So yeah, you can be a Christian, you can practice Judaism, you could be a Buddhist and still have Hermetic philosophy flowering within you as like common knowledge. So that's really where the pendulum is swinging. Not letting other people implant images within you, tell you who you are and what you're worth, and tell you what you're thirsty for. Like, without, the unconscious is going to become more conscious, and we're going to take more control of our inner world. And yeah, it requires upkeep, just like physical health. You know, we're not all going to be perfect. Just like the house that you take care of, it constantly needs to be washed, cleansed, dusted, rearranged. But we're going to actually, I believe, on a mass level, understand how important it is and have more of us, more skill, more agility, and more adeptness with cultivating the inner world, so that our outer world reflects our health and our wellness and our genuine humanity, you know, our genuine humanity and our deep, true imagination. So that is my perspective on this moment in time, the Pluto return. It is it's deep, it's dark, but it's also
Dope.
It's dope. As Andre said. So anyways, thank you so much, you guys. I'm just gonna finish up really quick here. Tanya said, fear is the number one behavior modifier, and this is deliberately used against us in the media, sales, advertising, and public health. That's right. Implanting images in your subconscious that erupt in fear, which prevents you from thinking. You know, other people, I mean, there are stupid people, but everybody's not stupid. People are afraid. Most people are not stupid. They're afraid, and therefore they can't think. And add to that you can't breathe on top of it all. You're afraid and you can't breathe. Imagine, like, how can we expect people to be thinking? Nevertheless, the evolutionary pressure that's being put on us right now is good for us, because we are getting tougher. We are getting tougher. We are getting more flexible. We are getting more responsive. We're becoming more intelligent. That's what the theory of evolution is. And I'm not like a strict Darwinist in terms of natural history, but I am aware that evolution is a dialogue that living organisms have with nature. Pressure gets put on us, and we respond by evolving. We get stronger, we get more resilient. And it is hard. I have not enjoyed this time at all on a personal level. When I tune into the collective, I'm really sad. But I'm also getting stronger, and I have to admit that. I was paralyzed by anger, rage, and fear when this all began and we first got locked down. I was paralyzed and so depressed I could barely move. And look at me now, you know, I have evolved, and we all are. So let's remember that too. Like, it's okay. We're learning. We're learning how to deal. We're learning how to deal, and we're getting more intelligent, which means that we're getting more flexible, more responsive, more agile. deeper wisdom is coming through us from our ancestors to guide us through this time. That's another thing about Pluto, is it dips deep into the wells of the past, the ancestral realm. Each one of us is an emanation of centuries and centuries and centuries of tremendous triumph and tremendous suffering. Each one of us comes from a lot. And so we can't forget that either. Like, our ancestors went through a lot and they learned a lot, and we have all of that within us, and we're adding to the narrative. But we come with a lot of depth and a lot of strength that we may not know about all the time until we're put under pressure. So remember that as well. You know, my great grandmother was a single mother during the Depression, and she had a job. She was a school teacher, and she had to turn her house into a boarding school, and she had to raise children all by herself because her husband abandoned her for another woman during the Depression. When I think about that, I feel like my life is super easy. But that's in me. And I know all of you have relatives like that too. And even if you don't know their stories, it's still written inside of you somewhere. So remember that. You can tap into that for strength. And that's what the Pluto return is about for all of us. So the United States, like, bless the United States. Even if you don't live here, let's hope and pray that this country can actually pull off some tremendous renaissance, that while this turmoil is going on, some truly profound flowerings of imagination and spirit will be revealed, that inspiration will continue to flow, and that the rest of the world will also be freed from this ugly global imperialism that is not truly the spirit of any nation. It's not truly the spirit of any person from any nation. Like, that's not us. It's a parasitic force that has taken control, but not forever. So let's hope that we witness the dissolution of that, the final dissolution. And I hope that all of you appreciated this perspective on the Pluto return. It is alchemical, and alchemy's rough, but it ends well. It ends well. It has a happy ending, like all great stories. So remember that. And that is it's an organic process of nature. So once again, like, nature reveals to us all truth, and transformation is possible. Regeneration is possible. Death becomes rebirth, and lead becomes gold. So I thank you so much, you guys, for coming. This was super fun. It's the first time I've ever done anything like this. So it was really, really sweet of you all to chit chat with me. And I look forward to coming back on and talking astrology again. So if any of you have any ideas about topics that you would like me to cover, please feel free to leave me a message or write me at aeolianheart@gmail.com. Because I want to have conversations that are relevant to people. So if you want to talk about something in particular, astrological, let me know, and I will come on and chit chat with you about it. Okay. So happy Pluto return, everybody. Everyone just hang tight, hang 10, be cool. And I will talk to you guys later. Peace out.